Peace, I'm Frank and welcome to the One Black Perch Publishing Channel, a space where I share my favorite books on writing, editing, and publishing, and give updates on our projects. Today I'm going to share some of the books in my weekly reading rotation, my loosely constructed reading system, and a couple of announcements about the first issue of our literary journal. So, quick backstory. I didn't have any ties to any large or independent publishing houses or university presses before starting the publishing company, and I started it because I knew that I would probably write stories and poems for the rest of my life, even if on and off. So I just wanted to have that vehicle for disseminating work and protecting it. I had a lot to learn, and I knew a lot might be boring to me, but unavoidable. So I budgeted time to read for the various roles that I wasn't familiar with or areas that I wasn't strong in, and still setting aside time to read for my own projects. For my reading system, I created 5 categories to choose books for. Just like being in school, you have 4, 5, or 6 classes. You might be reading just as many books throughout every week for a while. So that's sort of how I think about it. So first is a book on the craft of writing or about the writer's journey. It could be what's called a workshop in a book, where the writing advice takes you through opportunities and experiments with prompts or exercises with styles and forms, while the stories that the writer tells entertains you and sort of models the tip that they're giving you. The second could be a book on editing. This could be copy editing, line editing, developmental editing, an editor's autobiography or biography, like one of the books that I'm reading right now. One of the books I read that was really insightful was Max Perkins, Editor of Genius by A. Scott Berg. He was the editor of F. Scott Fitzgerald, the author that's known for writing Great Gatsby. I appreciate how it highlights like writer-editor chemistry, and it probably deserves a video on the topic at some point. One of the categories I left to personal choice, which I often use as an opportunity to read about something from my own writing. So I could be reading about trauma recovery, self-help, productivity. I could be reading protest art, something health related. The next category would be on business or entrepreneurship, or a book on the publishing industry, for instance, like Book Wars. The last category is any book that I choose by Bell Hooks, Alan Watts, or Amiri Baraka. I'm supposed to rotate them, but to date it turns out that I've read more of Amiri Baraka's work than either of the other two since I started this. And I wasn't that kind of strict with this system, so I ended up buying and reading the books back to back to back longer than I anticipated. I clearly wanted to binge his work. But here are the 5 books that I'm reading right now. This is Thinking with Type by Ellen Lupton. It's on the art and craft of typography. Features dozens of fonts. You might ask, like, what category does this fit in? And it's part of my education as editor to be concerned with layout and design, and educated around design generally. And Thinking with Type, he explains the construction of classic fonts, Google fonts. Starts with a history lesson on Latin, Chinese, Japanese characters, Indic script, and then introduces you to the various names for each part for each type. Like Latin type has shoulders, arms, stems, a spine, a crossbar. You get to see how these different elements come together to make a given type, and you can sort of start to understand what you like, gain your preferences, get your own ideas for things. You know, if you're a self-publishing author going DIY with everything, and then you can develop an eye for when it comes time for you to choose types for your genre. I'm not saying that if you read the book, you'll be out here designing fonts. I know I'm not. But when choosing them or contracting someone to make them, you don't feel blind or directionless going in. And even though the book is on typography, the reason that I'm cracking it open every other day right now is that it has these 2 later sections on text layouts, how to use space for the page, on the page for the greatest readability or the greatest effect on the reader. For most books whose format doesn't change much from page to page, like a novel that's just filled with indented paragraphs, there may not be a lot to gain from learning a lot of different layouts. But if you're designing a publication or a self-care journal or training manuals or a website, layout may matter just as much as the content itself. So the second book in my rotation is Toni at Random, The Iconic Writer's Legendary Editorship by Dana A. Williams. Readers might know her work as a writer, but this delves into her impact and influence as editor for Random House Publishing, which is one of the largest publishing houses. Got into this over the past few days, but right off the bat you learn that early in her career, she edited Huey P. Newton's To Die for the People. It shows you the kind of work that she was seeking out and doing. So the third book in my bundle of 5 is Fallen Sickness, A History of Epilepsy, From the Greeks to the Beginnings of Modern Neurology by Owsei Temkin. I had my first seizure when I was 2 years old and was diagnosed with epilepsy and medicated for it until early adulthood, basically. I manage it naturally now with eating and lifestyle habits that I practiced over the years. So This is a book that's more so a personal interest or a personal project category. I do occasionally write reflections about growing up with epilepsy, but never took to the topic like I would any other interest of mine, like digging into the history, reading different perspectives about it or different cultures. But now this is like the third or fourth book on epilepsy that I've read. So epilepsy actually traces back to early in human history and is referenced in the texts of religions and spiritual traditions with clear beliefs about the source and meaning and power behind the seizures. Throughout history, it seems like cultures continue to have debates about if it's a curse, if people with epilepsy are demonic or prone to possession, or on the other end, if they're soothsayers and prophets and sages, because there are actually cultures that venerate and celebrate children with epilepsy because they believe it's a marker that the child is the next leader in their spiritual community. So the fourth book is Ways of Seeing by John Berger. It's based on the 1972 BBC series. It has 7 essays, 3 picture essays on how we view art, bringing into question why we trust or fail to trust the overt meaning of what we see before words enter to change the context or persuade us in some sort of way. He sheds some light on what an artist's framing can tell us about how the artist sees, and that being worthy of observation and exploration, and uses the male gaze as an example that's worth examining. And I started on this after reading a book on books, which is a book about book design, and pretty much a directory of like amazing professional book design houses and their opinions on the state of the industry and its future. The 5th book in my bundle of 5 is the book on the taboo against knowing who you are by Alan Watts. Before this, I was reading Amiri Baraka back to back. His poetry, some of his plays, collection of eulogies he's written and read at the services of loved ones and prominent figures in the Black arts and culture community. Alan Watts is one of my favorite writers to read first thing in the morning now. before I get my day started, no matter what the essay is on, his work has like a really calming effect on me. So, which is actually the sort of the opposite way I feel after reading Amiri Baraka or in the midst of reading Amiri Baraka's work. So in the book, he uses Hindu philosophy to explain what the self really means, discussing how it's impossible to truly detach yourself from this world, how fruitless it is to try bending the natural world into the shape of our desires. After having considered the options for the cover of our literary journal, I decided not to put my hands on the world of image making. And despite the clear capability of AI image generators, I believe that there's nothing like the authentic, unapologetic stroke of a painter's brush or a sketch artist's pencil. So the first issue of our literary journal will feature an original piece by abstract expressionist, surrealist artist Alex Puryear. I've had the pleasure of meeting him at his studio for an interview that will be published in the journal. We talk about art making's therapeutic effects, that not being enough all the time, his observations about the art buying public, and lessons that he's had to learn about the professional parts of being an artist. A lot of magazines and journals don't really have themes or required topics, which is great. It leaves it open for more varied, random reading experience from author to author or story to story. But we live in such a chaotic time that being really intentional felt like the proper response, at least for the foreseeable future for our journal. And the journal's first theme is fulfillment, centering poems, stories, fictional or true, that highlight, point the way to, or illustrate striving for fulfillment. And it brings to the question, what's worth striving for, and the stories of how we sort of discover that. Our submissions are open until December 15th, so you can click the link in the description for details and share with your writer friends. I really just wanted to offer writers a vessel to pour some hope into, and that readers can revisit as a collection of great stories and writing, but writing that's, of its time and still looks ahead with a smile. So I'm currently waiting to receive proofs from a few print-on-demand companies so that we can choose the materials that make the most sense for the journal moving forward. And I'll be sharing those as they come in. Print version is planned to launch in spring of 2026. The digital version will launch early January, available free to subscribers. Leading up to the submissions deadline, I'll be sharing books on writing I wish I found years ago, the finished painting after I pick it up from Alex, and updates on the submissions that we've received. Till then, hit like and share with your writer friends. Peace.